Welcome y bienvenidos to our I Belong Here, How Black and Latina Educators Navigate Identity webinar. If you are here, it means that you are an aspiring or current teacher, you love teachers, or you recognize the value and importance of teachers in our communities. You may be a student wondering about the teaching profession. You may be an educator tapping into some inspiration. You may simply be curious about how to encourage more people into what is surely the profession that most shapes the future, teaching. Whichever group you fit in, I am glad you are here. I am Dr. or Doctora Nury Lizeth Castro, and I serve as the Senior Program Manager for Future Black and Future Latina teachers here at Teach. For the purposes of this webinar, I will serve as the moderator and facilitator. As a quick note, we use the Black and Latina racial terminology based on our users' self-reported identities and terminology alignment. In our survey at the end, you will have an opportunity to share your own thoughts regarding these points. Para que sepan, nosotros usamos la terminología latino y latina basada en las identidades y la alineación terminológica de nuestros usuarios. En nuestra encuesta, al final, tendrán la oportunidad de compartir sus propios pensamientos sobre este punto. Lastly, we have over 480 people registered to join us live from across the country for this webinar. So we are very grateful for your attendance. A quick agenda of our time together today. I will go through some grounding and community expectations for our time together. I will provide an overview of what we do at Teach and our Future Black Teachers, or FBT, and our Future Latina Teachers, or FLT, work. I will go through some introductions of our panelists and our guest speakers. We will have a panel discussion. Next, we will open it up for any questions and reflections from attendees, and then we will close. So first, to take a second to ground us into this moment and into this virtual space, while I will share some community expectations and just some logistics for our time together. So first, please utilize the Zoom chat box to share comments, build community, and access links we share. If you would like to enable closed captioning, you can do that in your settings through the live transcript option. If you have any questions, thoughts, reactions, or reflections throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the Zoom Q&A feature to share out. At the end, we will provide a survey link, and this will be an important tool for you all to share your direct feedback in order for us to be more intentional in our offerings. A recording of the webinar will be shared at the end and will be available in English and Spanish. Al final, compartiremos una grabación del seminario que estará disponible en inglés y en español. Si necesitan más información en español, por favor, déjennos saber por medio del chat o nos pueden mandar un mensaje privado a mí o a mis colegas. Desafortunadamente, para el resto de nuestro tiempo juntos hoy, la mayoría de nuestra conversación será en inglés. So as I mentioned, in the next few slides, I'll provide a very quick overview of our work at Teach and specifically our FBT and our FLT efforts. So at Teach, we are a free one-stop shop for anyone interested in becoming a licensed educator. Our team at Teach can support anyone, no matter their background, whether you're a high school student considering the classroom, a college student yet to decide your major, or a career changer interested in a new path, we're here to help. Teach has current classroom educators who are serving as licensure coaches. Aspiring educators can sign up for a one-on-one session to determine their next step to getting their teaching license based on their unique background. Teach is currently focused on working with community groups in Colorado, Connecticut, Dallas, Houston, North Carolina, South Carolina, and New York. We partner with school districts, teacher preparation programs, and community organizations to try to encourage as many people as possible to enter this profession through which they can have such profound impact on their local communities. At the end, we'll share a link so you can gain access to resources, tools, and financial support on your journey to becoming a teacher. We know that many factors contribute to a student's academic performance, including individual characteristics and family and neighborhood experiences. But research suggests that among school-related factors, teachers matter most. When it comes to student performance on reading and math tests, teachers are estimated to have 2 to 3 times the effect of any other school factor, including services, facilities, and even leadership. Research also demonstrates that students of color are more likely to succeed by having even just one teacher of similar race or ethnicity during their schooling, while all students benefit from a diverse educator workforce. For schools to create a positive, safe, and welcoming environment for all students, it is imperative to have an educator workforce that reflects the racially, ethnically, and linguistically diverse communities they serve. Scholars suggest that there might be a variety of reasons for the positive educational experiences students of color often have when they are taught by teachers of color. One of which, and the most important being, that teachers of color have a role model effect, whereby students of color identify with seeing people of color and people who look like them in professional roles. We also know that the teaching profession has a diversity gap in our country. Our nation's school children are approximately 42% Black and Latino or Latina, while the teaching force is only 16% Black and Latino or Latina. According to the Education Trust, 40% of the nation's public schools do not have a single teacher of color. In many states, Black and Latino Latina students attend schools without a single teacher of their same race or ethnicity. Students of color and students from low-income backgrounds are 4 times more likely to attend schools with larger percentages of uncertified or inexperienced teachers. Given these data points, Black and Latino Latina students, particularly those from low-income backgrounds, are being severely underserved, resulting in increased discipline referral rates, lower graduation rates, and less access to advanced coursework and college and career-ready educational opportunities. It is because of these data that I consider myself fortunate to lead this work at Teach and be in community with such incredible educators, like those who are joining us today from across the nation and who I have the privilege of introducing in a second. So, like I said, I will introduce each guest. I'm going to share a little bit about them, and then we will move into our panel discussion. So first we have Kiana Foster-Mauro. Kiana is an educator, an activist, and lifelong learner who is honored to serve as Connecticut's 2024 State Teacher of the Year. A 4th grade teacher in New London, Connecticut, Kiana is committed to empowering her students through culturally sustaining and human rights-centered learning. As a Black biracial woman, she understands the importance of diverse representation and culturally sustaining practices in education. Kiana believes teaching is a radical act that impacts minds and hearts. Welcome, Kiana. Next, we have scholar, poet, writer, educator, and future doctor in the 2021 Colorado Teacher of the Year, Gerardo Muñoz. Gerardo serves as the manager of learning and development at Denver Public Schools and is a doctoral student at the University of Denver. Gerardo taught social studies for 23 years and served as the student voice lead at his school, Denver Center for International Studies at Baker. He welcomes full community participation in his classroom. He is a tireless champion of anti-oppression awareness and training. He is the recipient of many awards and is the co-host of the Two Dope Teachers podcast, which we do encourage you to check out on Apple and Spotify. Welcome, Gerardo. Next, we have Cleyvis Rodriguez. Cleyvis has been teaching second through 5th grades for 18 years. Cleyvis is Dominicana and was born in the Dominican Republic and came to the United States at the age of 4. Cleyvis first studied computer science engineering in college and then realized that her calling was in teaching. To this day, Cleyvis does not regret this career choice. Welcome, Cleyvis. Bienvenida. Lastly, but certainly not least, we have Brian Pierre. Brian was born in the South Bronx and graduated from the NYC Teaching Fellows Program. Brian identifies as African American with West Indian and Latin descent. Brian is a New York City public school educator at PS 28 in the Bronx, New York, where he serves as a special education educator for all students within the kindergarten and 5th grade levels. Brian is also a member of various professional committees, a team member at NYC Men Teach, an adjunct professor, a dedicated community organizer, and he finds time to also be a teach coach based in New York. Welcome, Brian. And welcome to the four of you. Now we will move into our panel discussion. So to get us started, tell us a little bit about you. How did you become interested in teaching? How did you get here to where you are today?
Sure. So I'm Kiana. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all today and have these conversations. I have always loved being in spaces where learning is celebrated and where learning is kind of the highlight of what we're doing. So I always sought out and craved being in those spaces myself throughout my whole life. So I knew I always wanted to continue to be in those spaces throughout the rest of my life. So teaching kind of became the natural next step for me. And I'm really blessed to have been a part of a lot of communities that have helped me get here to where I am today. And so yeah, that's why I do what I do, why I am where I am today. Mhm.
Thanks, Kiana. Gerardo, tell us a little bit about you and how you got here.
I apologize. Thought I might be next. Hi, everybody. I'm Gerardo Muñoz. My pronouns are he, him, él. So how I got into teaching is a pretty labyrinthine sort of adventure, but essentially I had graduated from the University of Colorado at Boulder with degrees in history, Latin American studies, and ethnic studies, and wasn't sure what I was going to do with those degrees. And then I had an opportunity to start as a long-term substitute teacher at an alternative pathway school here in Denver. And I'll never forget walking into the classroom and just the energy that I got from my students reminded me a lot of the kids I grew up with over here on the east side. And I know people don't think about, the mean streets of Denver, Colorado, but where I grew up in a really difficult time for our neighborhood. And there was something about working with those students that made me feel like I need to be able to give them what our teachers didn't give us when we were youngsters, when we were there trying to figure out what we were going to do with our lives. So I went through an alternative licensure program, on-the-job training. I was so bad at this that for my first 2 weeks, my mentor was in my classroom every period of the day, helping me to stay on track and helping to guide me and teach me. Shout out Doris Dempsey. I'll never forget that. And I found that it was just a way not only to engage with community, but also to get on the path of possibly getting a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. And I think that's the greatest gift that 23 years in the classroom ever gave me.
Thanks, Gerardo.
Hi, so my name is Cleyvis Rodriguez. I've been teaching now for 18 years with the Department of Education. I didn't start out teaching, even though when I was little, all I did was play with a teacher. So when I got into college, I went into engineering, and it was in my third year of the career that I changed because I got enrolled in this NASA SHARP program where I worked with teenagers and they were building robotics. I was teaching, and that's when everything was like, what am I doing? So then I switched and went back to my passion of teaching, and I became a teacher. I haven't regretted it. And now I'm even mentoring. I mentor teachers also in my school, and now I'm a part of Teach doing the same thing. So yeah, teaching I think has always been something that I've wanted to do since I was little. So I had that little diversion, and then I realized, you know what, this is definitely what I needed to be doing, and I don't regret it.
Thanks, Cleyvis.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Brian Pierre, and similar to Geraldo, I was a business major. And one of the biggest things as a director of operations is coming across a lot of people hiring, firing. And one of my biggest, I guess, indicators of joining the classroom is when I came across a lot of marginalized youth of color who did not have the skill set to secure a job, whether it was entry-level management, whether it was management, even just supervision, right? Great people, great characters, just not able to pass a basic and simple cognitive exam or an entry-level math exam within the sectors that I worked for. So always wanted to teach. I still have a love for business as well, and then I became a fellow with the New York City Fellows Program. It's a teacher alternative certification program. That's the quickest way to get into teaching, and haven't regretted it since. I'm an adjunct professor at Hunter College as well, working with many student interns and through field supervision, and I teach special education courses there as well. And I just want to create the pathway for more teachers to make a difference like the ones that made in my life, and change that narrative to where the future of America can see more people of color in the spaces that they deserve to be in. So whatever I can do to increase the instruction, the systems and structures that help instruction for marginalized youth. That's what I'm in this profession for until God calls.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I love this theme that all of you mentioned about community and people pouring into you and you all pouring back into other educators. So what a testament to you all being here today too. So thank you. Next, we'll talk a little bit about authenticity. So what does authenticity mean to you as a Black or Latina educator? And how does authenticity show up or not in your professional life?
So I think the term authentic for me is just never being afraid to be who you are, embracing your culture and using that as a vehicle to teach others. So part of my pedagogical views on instruction is making sure that every student, every paraprofessional, every teacher assistant, myself, the principal, the AP, the community at large is represented within every aspect of the classroom, every aspect of community outreach, because the more you know about the various cultures that surround the educational forces of our institutions throughout the nation, the more relative it all becomes, right? You start to understand the historical connections that make us all human first, right? And then race just becomes the decorative piece, the curiosity that keeps us wanting to know more of how we connect as people. So for me, I am proud of who I am. I'm proud of my heritage, and I start with that, and then I push myself to understand the ethnic and cultural and racial backgrounds of everyone that I work with at PS 28X, to be specific, and consistently merge that to empower all of my Black, Latino, and Latina students to love themselves and love their culture and learn about their culture, so that way they can take that and create bridges and connect with all people that they come across.
Thanks, Brian.
And thinking about authenticity, to me, like Brian, it's your true self, bringing myself to everything I do. So in my classroom, I always like to bring a twist of myself. I know we have a curriculum and sometimes we're scared to step out of the box, but stepping out of the box is being authentic. So something I do is I bring my humor. I bring my class riddles inside. I have books that are not part of the curriculum that kids can relate to. Like this one book that is really good. It's called The Skin I'm In. I don't know if anyone has read it. It's by Sharon Flake. And we talk about color, and it's having uncomfortable conversations and showing them, I'm like you, and opening up those conversations that are hard to have and making sure that students can feel comfortable speaking. I feel like that's authenticity, a place where not only I can speak, but you can have the freedom to speak and feel not judged. And that's something that's throughout my school in PS 41. But I bring that a lot in my classroom. I bring a lot of me. I talk about my family. I open up a room where they can feel I can be myself and be accepted the way I am.
Thanks, Cleyvis.
Yeah, what both Cleyvis and Brian said, really, it's just so critical, and these are things that I really root myself in. I think authenticity for me, and I'm in a pretty deeply reflective state. For transparency, I'll share with everybody that I lost my father a few weeks ago, and we had a difficult relationship. Some of it was a result of the life that he was handed, and some of it was a result of him trying to raise this little Chicanito on the east side, right? And so when I think of authenticity, I think of what it means to honor all of my roots, right? To honor the roots that my Mexican father descended from, and to honor the roots of that my white mother, has, and that are really important, and not just racial roots, but the cultural things and the creativity, the arts, the type of discourse, the things that I learned that I really got into as a young person, and just really honoring those things. And that's not always an easy thing to do. I think everybody on the panel and many audience members will agree that when you identify as Black, Latina, Indigenous, person of color, person who comes from a marginalized background, people will try to box you in. We're frequently the only ones in a lot of our schools. And so for the first 14 years that I was teaching, I was the only person of color teaching in my school. So not only was I a stand-in for all Latina people, I kind of became the sort of stand-in for other communities of color as well. And I think that that is something that I had to really push hard against, and I wasn't always successful. But I think really not allowing anyone to box me in, whether it's from the dominant culture in our schools, or whether it's from quote unquote my own culture, which is its own sort of, complex sort of declaration. I think the other thing for me is just saying the thing. I always get this feedback from people that, yeah, Gerardo, you say the thing. And I'm not an aggressively combative person. I ask a lot of questions, and I ask people to clarify their things. And I tend to ask the questions that are really difficult, that really sit with me. And so to me, it's about authentically engaging as the person that I am, and continuing to strive to do that better and better every day. And also recognizing that the self is really hard to know. There are new parts of myself that I discover all the time and that I uncover. So, but I think it is really about, honoring, yes, the people who came before me and who held me up, but also honoring myself in the way I chose to engage my identities and incorporate them. So, yeah.
Thanks, Gerardo.
Yeah, I mean, I really have to echo a lot of what has been shared already. For me, it's authenticity is really just bringing my full self into the spaces that I'm in, right? Bringing my passions, bringing my joy, bringing my identity into those spaces. And in doing so, it shows my students that it's okay for them to do that too. And in that aspect, it really builds an intentional community, right? A community that is really locked into this idea of celebrating ourselves and celebrating each other in that community, and then creating space for others to do so as well, and welcoming others into that space, having those real conversations, just being very open. And that includes being open about the mistakes and about the things that I still don't know about myself or about the world or about each other, and going on that journey of discovery with my community.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And I think the common theme I'm hearing amongst all of you is bringing your full self and honoring your full self, and setting that example for our students, because I think it just goes right back to the research, right? Seeing these role models, especially for kids who maybe haven't seen it in other spaces, I think is exactly what all of you are getting at. So this is kind of similar, but I'd love to hear about how you all navigate and balance your racial identities in school, in the community, in surrounding communities, in the district. Have there been challenges? What successes have your identities brought with them? That was a lot. I'm happy to repeat anything.
That's okay. I'll kind of dive in. I think identity, and I guess the self-discovery of my own identity has really kind of been a really long journey for me over my life, and one that I'm still on in many ways, and trying to uncover those new parts, and trying to understand how I fit in to this giant jigsaw of our world, and finding new ways that I do so. So as I've kind of been on that journey, I've had to really become self-assured of myself and okay with who I am and knowing myself very quickly, even as I try to balance that with the self-discovery. I'm really fortunate in that I work in a district where the community members and the students look a lot like me and others on this panel. So it's really a joy in that aspect, but at the same time, the workforce, the teacher force does not. So, you know, I think it's really been a joy in being able to have my identity reflected in my students and their families in the community, and then to have their identities reflected in me and myself and the teaching that I do as well. But at the same time, having to really advocate for that within you know, the workspace that I'm in and operating in. So I've had to be really intentional in the representations that I'm putting out there, right? So that includes, you know, the hall displays, that includes the conversations that I'm bringing up, that includes the students that we're highlighting, that includes the celebrations, the holidays, all of those things, ensuring that I am making sure that those are being represented as well.
Yeah, I really love this question. This is sort of the this is kind of the crux of my doctoral work, as I examine the lived experiences of first year educators of color and how we and what sort of implications we draw about retention. And so we know that belonging is such an important part of it. I'll put it this way. I do not want new teachers, young or career-changing Black, Brown, and Indigenous educators to have to lose parts of themselves to be successful in the teaching profession. I mentioned that I was the only teacher of color in any school for the first 14 years of my career. And in the process, not with students, I always felt like I could be myself with students. Because like Kiana mentioned, most students in Denver public schools either share an identity with me or I know enough about where they grew up that I understand who they are. It's again with colleagues where it's a little bit different, and I learned to just compartmentalize my racial identities until I met my co-host Kevin Adams, and we were able to start talking about this in ways we didn't. I think one of the things that I learned to honor is the fact that I don't have a singular cultural home base. And I think that's probably true of everybody. We strongly identify with one cultural identity, but there are actually many identities who make us who we are. And so, but because I was a Mexican American kid who grew up in one of the most segregated cities in the United States, I didn't grow up with a lot of other Mexican kids. I grew up in Denver's proudest, most historical Black community. And that's where so much of the cultural home that I had until I had an opportunity to learn more about who I was kind of developed. So I think my greatest strength is that I try to honor all of my identities, which allows me to sort of be a border crosser. It allows me to relate and connect with students and understand them in a way that I think is really powerful. There's a lot of kids who don't ever know how to take me, right? Because I do engage in a multitude of different ways. I think that I always have to keep in mind what it is that I'm trying to accomplish in a certain space and how I can do that for the kids who rely on my services. And I'm no longer a classroom teacher, but as I develop educators of color, we have a powerful set of teacher development programs in my district. And I know that sometimes I have to go into some of these conversations and say, okay, so how do I get the Black, Brown, and Indigenous children in my district the things that they need? And when we have all of these people working in white supremacy, and I don't just mean white leaders and educators, there are educators of color who also work in whiteness. And so how can I center the good that I can do and let the other things kind of fall away and just kind of work around this. It's not easy. And I hope I don't make it sound easy, but I think it is really that balance is about who am I doing this for? And what am I willing to do to advance opportunities for our kids who may later, as kind of Brian mentioned, who may later become teachers?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Gerardo.
So in thinking about identities, we think of notions of ourself, and this is so identity is our authenticity, like going back to what we were talking about. And and we have to navigate through our own identities and then bring that into our classroom. And something that our school and the district has been doing, and I feel like I'm advertising books, but we've been reading The Cultivating Genius by Goldie Muhammad. And I don't know if you know that it's like the 5 pursuits. And so all our lessons now are embedded around the 5 pursuits, and where I'll mention, I think you guys know. So it's joy, identity, criticality, intellect, and yeah, I mentioned them. So all of them, 5 pursuits. So and the identity, of course. So in every lesson that we do, we're forced to kind of think about our identity and the demographics of our students, and we're having the conversations with the teachers and the staff. So it's like a spiraling effect. So now our lessons are embodying the demographics of our classroom. We're incorporating our cultures, their cultures. Something that we've been doing, like this year, I had students talk about Ramadan, and we bringing in things that we don't normally have in our curriculum. We're embedding it in our lessons because we are having those conversations about identity. So that is one thing that our school has been pushing for, and it's talking about the pursuits of and the happiness of our teaching. We bring joy, our kids are happy.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Cleyvis.
Cleyvis is very powerful, right? I love when you said identity is our authenticity. I think that is, I'm going to borrow that, to be very honest and transparent. I agree with everything that all of my colleagues just stated. I'm going to echo a little bit on what Gerardo said to the first question, and kind of blended in the second question. I think that as we're going back to my first year teaching, like, I couldn't understand why I was the only male of color in the building, and it was just so perplexing because most of the South Bronx is children of color, right? If we look at our nation, 42%, as we just learned, represent as marginalized youth, and then only 16% of the teaching force is actually teachers who represent that demographic as well. And it was a little bit frustrating. I was angry in some days to say that, why have we allowed rather this to be a phenomenon for so long, and not just in New York, but across the whole entire nation. And then I think that when I got immersed with NYC Men Teach and the works of Goldie Muhammad and the works of Howard Stevenson and understanding racial literacy, I took the lack of males period, because there are not enough male teachers of color anywhere in the nation, right? But I took that as an opportunity to be the first experience for so many people, right, including the marginalized youth that I served, and I kind of looked at the opportunity as a blessing to kind of be the first experience, the first Black teacher, the first West Indian teacher, the first Afro-Latino teacher, the first just in general. I think that's the biggest thing that came to my mind. And it's saying that, okay, I know that after my students graduate and go into middle school, they're leaving with a sense of understanding what was that experience with Mr. Pierre, and how do I find other teachers who can give me the same. So I think my identity and has played in the beginning, played a role where I felt a little bit outcasted, and then I kind of took that negative and turned it into a positive and said, okay, well then make the experiences that everyone that I come across can say that, okay, this is the model, so to speak, right? This is the standard, right? And then create spaces where we continue to uplift the standard. And like I said, through my work with NYC Men Teach, getting more and more males of color within the education system, because we just need to have an equilibrium, I feel, across that line. So that's my piece when it comes to my identity in the different spaces of
Thanks,
education.
Brian. Yeah. I heard a lot. I heard self-discovery. I heard what I'm going to call intention, being intentional. And all four of you talked about being asset-based in this work, right? So I'm thinking about Cleyvis, if you're promoting books, now here I go promoting frameworks. But I'm thinking about community cultural wealth, right? I'm thinking about funds of knowledge. I'm thinking about these frameworks that tell us how rich education can be if and when our cultures are interweaved into everything that we do. So thank you all for that. My next question is something that I think Gerardo touched on a little bit, and Brian, you touched on when talking about being the first and sometimes being the only person of color in a space. And I think that can be a very powerful thing. I think that comes with a great responsibility as well. And sometimes a responsibility that we take serious as we should. And sometimes it adds additional pressure on us, right? So in thinking about this, I want to unpack the idea of the invisible tax a little bit. So to just kind of provide some definition. So invisible tax is something that scholars refer to as sometimes extra responsibilities, usually unpaid, that are expected of or land on educators of color due to their racial identity. Some of these examples can be additional mentorship for students or younger educators or community members. It could be even being like a pseudo family and community liaison because of the cultural understanding. It might be translating or interpreting if you speak multiple languages or can read and write multiple languages. It might be disciplining other students, well, disciplining students of color because of your alignment in identities, right? So in thinking about this invisible tax, I want to hear a little bit about how you all experience this, if you experience it. Were you prepared for this before you entered the classroom, and what does it look like?
Was I prepared? Absolutely not. I think that in my experience, because I'm the only male, I become the go-to for discipline. So I was the unofficial dean of my school the first year that I taught. And to be very transparent, some of the most simplistic things that could have just been dealt with a conversation and a one-to-one, some use of empathy or sympathy in wanting to relate with the students that were in front of either the principal, the AP, or another teacher, was kind of just brought to my attention with all the other duties that I had to take upon as a first year teacher, and just trying to understand what in the world does pedagogy mean, and what does differentiation mean, and how do I write all these IEPs. And now, in the middle of me teaching, here's a principal giving me two students. Mr. Pierre, I want you to deal with Rayvon and Carlos because you're good with culturally responsive education here. So it was a bit frustrating, right? Because I felt like, well, why aren't you, as my principal at that point was a Black woman, so she was a person of color, trained and wanting to immerse yourself within the same tactics that I'm going to use to make these two gentlemen feel included, right? But then my personality is to just, brush it off and look at what's in front of me. So those students became transitionary in terms of these problem students became scholar students, right? So you don't want them in the regular fifth grade classroom, bring them into my classroom, right? I'll make 32 become 34. And it's not that they were stupid or not able to succeed. It was they needed the attention that they deserved, and they needed somebody to look at them beyond the labels that they were given, right? They came from some brokenness in terms of their home life. And I was able to quickly just build that relationship and turnkey, students that got on the honor roll, right? That graduated and got into great middle schools. Is it taxing? 100% yes, because it's something that's not expected. But to many of the sentiments that have been stated here, I think that teaching is a lifestyle, right? And sometimes you become the mother, the father of someone who doesn't have that great influence. So as frustrating as it can be, um, it's the end result is just trying to make a difference in the life of all the young ones in front of you, and to know that those kids were able to really just find an outlet and find comfort. It's probably something that I would continue doing. Not easy, right? To Gerardo's point, it's not easy, but it's worth it at the end because there's a difference that's going to be made.
I agree with you, Brian, because at the beginning I was frustrated, but now I hate to say that I'm already used to it. Two things for me is the translation, because in the grade I'm the only one that speaks Spanish, so automatically, oh, Miss Rodriguez. Or I have such a discipline that I always get I'm gonna call them the heavy hitters, or I have like I'm burning out because I know the better I do my job, the more is laid on me. And it was becoming frustrating, but now I just take it as I can handle this, I can do this. But yes, like Brian, I felt like you frustrated because the better I am at something, the more is given to me because I'm good at. So it's like either I'm good or I'm being good is not as great sometimes, but now I've come to peace with it. And now sometimes I even volunteer myself because I already know that they're gonna come to me. And like with Brian, at the end of the day, these students come out of my classroom with better behavior and doing well academically. So yeah, I can relate with you, Brian.
Cleyvis.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things I have to say on this question. To Clevis's point, I because of the legacies of internal colonialism and white supremacy and oppression, I didn't get a chance to learn Spanish growing up. I for a long time I had people complimenting my English, which is really funny because I'm kind of like, yeah, I mean, it's my first language. I would hope that I speak it well. My white mom is very educated, that kind of thing. But I think that came with it's just really funny. And it came with a lot of assumptions made on me that dug into my insecurities. Um, People asking me to translate when I was a first year teacher, when I had only started to move towards reclaiming my language a year or two previously, and then having that feed my insecurity that I'm somehow letting down my Latine students and communities because I don't speak Spanish. And I'm told that my Spanish has gotten a lot better by people who are just very nice and kind to me. Um, but I think like what a lot of this has done has put me in this kind of perpetual state of critical self-reflection. And I think kind of to Clevis's point, I'm a better person for it because I can see the gaps in my work more quickly than anybody else can. But on the flip side, it's like always being on defense and always, knowing that if I don't catch this, somebody else is going to catch it. In terms of being first, I think about it as before anything else, to me, it's a grieving process. Um, I was the first Chicano identifying person to be named Colorado Teacher of the Year. And that's like really cool, kind of. But Colorado used to be part of Mexico. How is it possible that I'm the first one like me, and I use that term broadly, to represent the teachers in our state? And so it is grieving. How many brilliant minds didn't get recognized the way I did and didn't have the opportunities to learn, grow, and connect that I did? It's grieving the teacher that I thought I was going to be, which was probably problematic. I was a kid. I'm like, I'm going to go and I'm going to drop all this knowledge on these kids. Like I've been doing ethnic studies and they're going to they're going to know the whole timeline of Black and Brown and Indigenous people in the world. And then I get there and I find out actually I had kids who had been completely alienated and disenfranchised within the education system. I had to become a healer. And I had my own trauma, my own racialized trauma that I had to process. And I have to grieve that in a lot of ways, I did not get to be the teacher that maybe I would have been able to be if I had reflected the majority of teachers. And so it is really a grieving process. But there's a great podcast, Prentice Hempel's podcast. They just put up an episode called Grief is the Medicine. So it's not that I move past it. It's not that I think about like, well, I'm over it now, and now I'm really successful. I was teacher of the year, and yay. It's more about I have to center what did not happen for so many children like me and like us on this panel. I have to center that and make sure that it happens for others. So I do think that what has ensued is I've developed a skill set that a lot of people don't have, and now a lot of it is trying to lean into that skill set and saying, and I mean, I'm looking at Brian and Kiana and Cleyvis, and I'm like, man, we've been through stuff that a lot of these folks have never been through and would not know what to do. And so really carrying that with a measure of pride, if I'm being really honest.
Thanks, Gerardo.
Yeah, I attended and graduated at the University of Connecticut, and I was really fortunate at UConn to have had an organization called Leadership and Diversity, and it's a completely student-run organization that works to support educators of color looking to enter the field. And so I was really fortunate to have found that community really, really early on, even before actually entering the field. And so I was able to learn from others on how to kind of navigate and grapple with that kind of invisible tax, because it is heavy and it is draining. And you think you're fine some days, and then the next day it's not fine. And so I think learning to understand my limits, what I'm willing and not willing to do, and learning how to communicate that with others has become really important. And learning how to do that from my community was incredibly helpful. And then just becoming okay with not being okay every single day with it, right? And providing that grace and that space for myself, and becoming more open with that, and kind of reclaiming the power within that as well.
Thanks, Kiana. Thank you all for that. So our next question will wrap up the panel portion before we open up for Q&A. So we're going to close out on doing some future building, some dreaming, some world building. So this question, I want to hear about what your dream of or for the future of our education system is, and specifically, where do aspiring Black, Latino, Latina, Latinx educators fit in that dream?
Yeah, for me, my dream for the future of our educational systems has always been for it to be more equitable, because it has to be. And there's no other choice but for it to become more equitable. But I also really and I think I've found this dream more so this year than I have in the past, but I really sincerely hope and dream and in working for our education systems to become more joyful, for our educators, for our students, for their families, for our communities. It needs to center joy. It needs to center the people that are in it. And off of that, I think our Black and Latinx educators really, have to be kind of in many ways at the forefront of that, right? I think we're at the forefront of that work already. And I think with us being at the forefront, I think it's also really important that we're able to take part in that joy and to take part in that dream, and not just be fighting for it, but being allowed and able to really enjoy it and the fruits of it as well.
I agree with Kiana. It's like bring back the joy in teaching. Like I feel like there's been so much focus on testing and assessments and our evaluations that I feel that we're getting lost. And we're losing the passion. And I think it's in, like I said, going back to the cultivating genius, we need to bring back the joy. Like if we're not happy, our students are not going to be happy. So we need to find ways to bring passion in our learning, because we learners too. Our students are learning, but we also as well have to be ongoing learners. And I think that would make a bigger change for the future. Like we have to continue learning. We can't stay stagnant, because if we're stagnant, then our kids are not going to grow as learners.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all that. This is my favorite part when we start like kind of dreaming the future. Like I think that because I think like there's a great collection of social justice centered science fiction stories. I think people on the panel
Mhm.
probably know what I'm talking about. It's called Octavia's Brood. And in that whole collection is centered on how critical it is for us to have this radical imagination because social justice work and liberation work is science fiction, right? We have to be able to picture a world in such real terms that doesn't exist yet, but we have to be able to see it as if it's right there, right? And I think that's what's really powerful. So I guess a couple of things that I would say is, if we're able to achieve what all the teachers on this panel are working towards, and Brian, I think you named it at the beginning, if we're able to achieve a teaching core that reflects the children in our classrooms, I just think about the endless epistemologies, the endless pedagogies. Like there's a pedagogical gap when we have a portion of the population that is disproportionate in the education profession than it is in the nation at large. So, like, if I'm the only Latin Chicano identifying person in a school, well, that means Cleyvis isn't there. That means Kiana's not there. Like, I am one Latine experience. And if I'm supposed to be that role model, like, and even as proud as I am of my pedagogical accomplishments and my ability to be a teacher scholar, like a public scholar, um, I am limited. I'm one person. And so I think about what happens if we bring all of these pedagogies, how beneficial is that to kids? We've got teaching methods and teaching philosophies that have not been enacted, that have not been activated because of the lack of access to this profession. And the last thing I'll say, one of the greatest experiences I had was teaching student voice and leadership for my last 3 years as a teacher. And I've got this dream of this fully democratized education system where teachers and students are working together in solidarity to learn together and to really all of us own the process of education in ways that are the most appropriate for our communities and that will uplift all of us. So I got some strong feelings about that. That's that pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will, the way Antonio Gramsci argues. All right.
Thanks, Gerardo.
Gerardo, well said. Well said. I think of the words of Sonia Sotomayor, who said, "Until we get equal equality in education, we won't have an equal society." And I think one of our biggest steps, for me at least, as an aspiring school leader, I think I go into the fall trying to become an assistant principal, is looking at those numbers 42 and 16, and how do we get 16 to turn into 42?
Mhm.
Right? And then once we can get 16 to turn into 42, as 42 starts to grow, then so does the 42% that represents the teaching force, right? And I think that's just being willing to create systems and structures, for me, once again, through NYC Men Teach, through teach.org, through Hunter, through God willing, when I become that assistant principal and going as far as possible from there,
Mhm.
is being intentional in making sure that culture and social justice kind of meet at every single pedagogical framework that we invest in, every single curriculum that's being modified, every single IEP that's being written, every single mantra that's being quoted in professional development. So it's being intentional in making sure that sense of identity meets the authenticity of every single person that I can influence within the capacity of what I do now and what I intend to do in the future. And I think that, all it takes is one school to have that one vision, and then relate it to academics. And as academics starts to grow, then that one school becomes the model that other schools are going to
Mhm.
say, hey, what did you guys do to get your numbers to move? And all of a sudden now you've become a Title I school to a blue ribbon school, right? And your academics are skyrocketing. Your student enrollment rates are rising, and it's all because we didn't do anything different but just open the ideology of acceptance and inclusion through every practice possible. And I've seen it work. You know, it's gotten me this far in my career. I've seen it in everything that my colleagues are stating here. So there's power in loving those people of all cultures, right? And keeping that at the forefront. So I think that is not only my dream, but the lifestyle that I've committed to within this educational walk, and what I try to uplift every day that I'm given the life and energy to walk into all the spaces educationally to make that difference with identity and authenticity.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot. I'm hearing culture, I'm hearing community, absolutely joy, radical imagination. As you all were talking, I also was thinking about Paulo Freire and all the work that he wrote, right? About what this looks like in a way that is um, inclusive of student voice and how we reconsider some of these power dynamics that we've seen in schools and in education. So thank you all for that. I think that was a powerful closing to the panel discussion. So now we will transition to some Q&A. I do believe we have some questions from our attendees, so I will turn it over to my colleague Elizabeth. If anyone attending has any questions, if you haven't put it in the chat, please feel free to do so and we will facilitate them.
Okay, I'm going to start with this first one. What, in your experience, do you consider a culturally responsive education or teaching? How do you move it beyond Black History Month, AAPI, etc., in your everyday practice?
I'll quickly go. Something that I do in every mentoring session, in the lessons that I also give out with the sets instruction that I'm in charge of, is finding pieces where curriculum can be subjective. And I think if we think of the workshop model, so when you start with your do now, my do now is always going to start with some type of culture responsive practice that ties back to the standard, right? The I do of the mini lesson, right, is going to be based off curriculum, right? And then the we do is where I start to infuse another culture responsive task. And then when we go into our cooperative learning groups, right, I start to now infuse more CRSE, and then our exit ticket, whether it's a share out or a physical activity, has more of that social justice and restorative practice CRSE embedded within as well. So all of these things obviously communicated to my APs, to my principals, to the teachers that I work with, them understanding that yes, curriculum is going to be held at the standpoint of what I model, because that's the biggest concern as far as the school that I work in, the district that I represent. But then you have to allow me as well to use culture responsive education as that vehicle to increase student engagement. So that would be my strongest suggestion, is make sure that you meet the demand of what your administrators are asking you to do in terms of exposing the curriculum, but stand for the other pockets where you can infuse CRSE. And in addition to lesson planning, you know, maybe during transitions where you're going from one subject to the next subject in elementary school, prior to opening that next subject, form a restorative justice circle for any issues that happen in the classroom, form a community circle, right? To just talk about different ethnic practices and what students like or don't like, or a co-generative dialogue to get feedback on what next steps should be happening in instruction. And these are all ways of just bettering the presence of culture responsive education within instruction.
I was going to agree with Brian. Providing students with choice and a voice gives the students voice, and I always like to incorporate their thoughts inside of my lesson. So give them a voice and give them choice. That's always important in every lesson as well.
Because we're short on time, you can choose to go back to that question, or I'll share one more, which is that belonging is so important for all. How can we include Asian and Indigenous educators into the conversations of Black and Brown teachers so they feel they have a space to belong within the conversations and struggles of navigating their identities as well?
I mean, I can start with that as kind of a person who's moved in between a lot of these spaces. I think you start with stories, right? You start with people's lived experiences. What did education mean for you growing up within the culture that you grew up in? and where are the assets that can be found there. So I highly recommend the Four Arrows book, Teaching Truly, which is an indigenized pedagogy. And of course, it doesn't encompass all of the 500 nations that were here before 1492, but it's a beginning to understand that there are pedagogies and epistemologies that are rooted culturally. Every single culture has a way of passing down knowledge and wisdom. So it is ensuring that in our schools, in our districts, that we're actually honoring those ways of knowing and those ways of learning, and not just, making a sort of generic statement during a Heritage Month or at the beginning of a presentation. I think it's really important that we honor and validate these various ways of teaching and learning.
Anyone else want to add anything? Okay. All right, so keeping an eye on time. This is gonna wrap us up. So Brian, Kiana, Cleyvis, Gerardo, thank you all so much for joining. Thank you for your candor and your vulnerability and sharing pieces of yourself with us in this virtual space. To our attendees, thank you for joining us and showing up and engaging with us in this way. So as a reminder, you all can log into your Teach account to access scholarships, to access fee reimbursements, information on becoming a teacher, free advising available in English and in Espanol. And if you are in one of the states that I did not mention at the beginning, we can still do our best to support you in your journey to the classroom. So you on the next screen, we will end on the next screen, and you all will see a QR code for a reflection and a survey QR code. Please share your feedback with us. We would love to know what you all thought of this time together and how we can better improve in the future. And then lastly, on this screen, you will see all these ways that you can stay connected with us. This is the best way to keep track of what we're doing, our upcoming opportunities, and all of the exciting things we have planned for the next academic year. So with that, again, thank you all. Buenas tardes, buenos días, whatever time it is when you all are watching this, and really excited to see y'all next time.
Shout out to this great panel. Appreciate y'all.